Hello, good people of YouTube. Mountbatten here, and today we are going over my top 5 most disappointing premium ships. These are 5 premium ships that had quite a bit of hype building up to their release. However, once they were released, turns out they were, well, rather quite a major letdown because of one thing or another. And these are ships that I wouldn't really recommend too much in today's World of Warships, and we'll talk about that with each individual ship. But before we get going, if you are looking for a in-game clan to join, TSOF, the channel's clan, is recruiting. We have clans that are set up just for casual gameplay, if you just want to have a nice naval base to boost your in-game earnings and such, or if you're interested in the more competitive scene, we do have clans for that as well. You can follow the link in the description down below to fill out the application and begin the process. So again, looking for a clan, I invite you to check out ours. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get on into the list. If you do find yourself enjoying this video, please make sure to drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel while you're down there. It helps out, of course, on the YouTube side of things. So let's go ahead and get going with number 5, which is the Tier 7 American battleship, the California. Now, the California was a battleship I was very, very excited about. I love the way these Pearl Harbor refit ships look. Like, they look so cool. It's such an interesting blend of, old dreadnought technology and, that post-Pearl Harbor, more modern 20th century naval technology smashed onto these ships. They've got the rebuilt superstructures, they have the modern 5-inch guns, improved AA suites. Usually they're just absolutely bristling with AA guns. They look excellent. So when I heard we were getting the California, which is a Tennessee class, I was very excited to see that she was in her post-Pearl Harbor refit. But, well, she released, and, yeah, not exactly the ship I was expecting. Now, of course, I do like more of the mid to close range gameplay, so I was hoping they were going to make her kind of a Doom Turtle, which we did eventually get with the West Virginia 44, but instead we got just another battleship. It goes 20 knots, it's meant to be played at medium-long-ish range, and it's a big pinata that you can just beat to death if you do catch it. And what really hurts the California is that her guns are not overly great for Tier 7. They're not terrible either. They're just kind of, because she does have 12 14-inch guns, and sure, that is a lot of shells that you're throwing at the enemy, especially if you do catch them broadside. But by like Tier 7 standards, it's just, especially considering too that Tier 7 gets up-tiered quite a bit, and in many cases it is a double up-tiering. That means you have 14-inch guns and you're trying to deal with Tier 9 ships, which 14 inches at Tier 7 is already, you're kind of losing pace with the tech lines and such as far as the caliber race goes in terms of the common caliber battleship guns that you'll find at those tiers, but it's doubly hurtful when you have to deal with Tier 9 ships, right? So what you do find yourself doing in the California is that you do have to unfortunately spam a lot of HE, and with the dispersion that at least I get on my California, it's not exactly making it happen. And then again, you're this big giant slug of a ship with a huge superstructure. You're incredibly just, a damaged pinata. It's so squishy, so incredibly squishy. And yeah, it leads to not a great experience. And a plus, again, the whole, you can only go 20 knots thing does most certainly hurt. Now, in the California's defense, she has been receiving a couple of buffs here recently. She got a big buff to her main battery reload time. It was down from 34 seconds to now 32.5 seconds, so a 2-second reload buff, which is pretty nice. And they changed the parameters of her engine, so instead of being an absolute slug, she can at least accelerate fairly quickly now, like the Vermont line can do. So she's a little bit more comfortable to play because of those 2 buffs right there. And they have been, in some ways, slowly giving her some love here and there, but yeah, we'll see what happens as time goes on with the California. But yeah, definitely a ship that I would highly recommend you skip, especially considering so that the Arizona is a Tier 6 American battleship that has the exact same guns as California does, but they're a tier lower. And she's a lot more comfortable to play at Tier 6 than the California is at Tier 7. So going on our way down now to number 4, we have the Tier 9 Japanese battleship, the Iwami. Now, the Iwami is disappointing for a different reason than the California. Rather than her just being quite terrible, she wasn't exactly what was advertised. And it seems like they designed the Iwami one way, and then they kind of decided to switch gears with it halfway through developing her, but then rather than committing to one playstyle or the other, they either intentionally or unintentionally made her a mix of two playstyles that don't really go that well together. And what I'm talking about is that when the Iwami was announced, she was billed as a mid to close range Japanese battleship, which is cool. We don't have a high tier mid to close range Japanese battleship. We have one at tier 6 with the Mutsu, and the Mutsu can be good fun, just playing her as a brawling battleship at tier 6. She has a high number secondary gun. She has a 20-second reload time on her torpedo tubes and big guns for her tier with 16-inch guns. So it's like, okay, cool. We might be finally getting a higher tier variant of this. And it looked like that initially. She has the wonderful Harugumo turrets as her secondary guns. These are those secondary guns that can pin 30 millimeters of armor base. They're the same secondary guns that the Shikishima had, well, still does have, but, that she had back in the day when you could play her as a mid to close range battleship. And this is, I think it was shortly after the Commander rework. So we just lost the Shikishima from being a good secondary Japanese battleship. So it's like, okay, cool, maybe we are going to be getting the Iwami as a kind of a replacement for that. But she comes out and, well, she's not a mid to close range battleship. She's quite not great at it for a number of reasons, and you just have to play her like every other Japanese battleship, which is medium to long range. But you have 8 guns with the Japanese battleship dispersion pattern, which isn't great at all. So what wound up happening, what we wound up receiving in game, is a Japanese battleship that does have the Harugumo turrets with the 30 millimeters of pin, but if you full tilt build into the secondary guns of the Iwami, you'll cap out at 10.5 kilometers, which is not very far by tier 9 standards. And yeah, the ship's not that fast, only goes 29 knots with a speed flag, which, okay, there's plenty of higher tier secondary ships that can't go 30 plus knots, but yeah, she's pretty slow, and then you couple that with the short secondary range, not that great. And then what's really weird is they gave her the 20 kilometer Shikishima torpedoes out of nowhere. And I get it, if you're making a brawling battleship or a medium to close range battleship, it would make sense to strap some torpedo tubes on there. But the 20 kilometer Shimakaze torpedoes, don't really know what they were going for here. So it seems like they wanted to make a secondary Japanese battleship at a higher tier, but then they just settled into the traditional Japanese battleship playstyle at higher tier and bolted some Shimakaze torpedoes to the hull. So yeah, and 10.5 kilometer secondaries can work at higher tier if you're something like the Italian secondary ships like the Sicilia that has the smokescreen. Same with the Giuseppe Verdi that has the smokescreen, right? You can use that smokescreen to get closer and let the secondaries rip, but not when you're a Japanese battleship that doesn't have a smokescreen or an amazing concealment to help you out there. So yeah, we got a tier 9 Japanese battleship that still has the secondaries, has a small number of main battery guns by tier 9 standards, and has the Japanese battleship dispersion. Has a pretty decent reload if you build into it, but it's just like, okay, if I wanted to play a medium range tier 9 Japanese battleship, I'd go play the Izuma, because it's a better, medium to long range ship at that tier. So it's just like, I don't know, the ship had a identity crisis. I was very excited for her to come out, and then this happened. So big look down in my book. All right, going on our way down now to number 3, we have the Tier 9 American Premium Destroyer, the Halford. Now, the Halford made a lot of noise when she was announced because it's a hybrid destroyer. And I remember when she was announced, players were like, oh my god, they're giving the stealthy, well, before submarines were introduced, the stealthiest class in the game that already does a tremendous amount of spotting, even more spotting now with the ability to launch and recover aircraft. So, yeah, it was like, oh my god, these hybrid ships, they're expanding so fast. We have the hybrid battleships, now we get hybrid cruisers, and now we're getting hybrid destroyers, and boy, did this ship get memory hold once she was released, because, yeah, it's just terrible. It's so bad. It's such a bad combination to put together, because turns out, when you put airplanes on a destroyer, which destroyers are some of the most active classes in the game, right? You have to be constantly sitting there piloting them, paying attention to your surroundings, and being aware of what's going on in order to not, well, get murdered. When you give that class planes, it typically doesn't end well, because when you're flying the aircraft, you're fully you're fully flying the aircraft. They're not like the old RTS CVs. They're not AI controlled. You are piloting the aircraft, which means your ship is just sitting there on the map or sailing whatever autopilot course you set it on. So, yeah, if you want to not get blapped while you're flying your planes, you either have to sit in a smoke screen or sit behind an island or sit, toward the rear of your team. And then the airplanes aren't even that great. They get shot down incredibly fast with Tier 9 and Tier 10 AA and Supership AA2. So, yeah. And then to get the aircraft on the Halford, you had to give up a turret and a rack of torpedoes, so you lose DPM with your main battery guns, and they didn't decrease the reload time to make up for that. So you just have a worse Fletcher without one of its guns and without one of its torpedo racks, flying mediocre planes at Tier 9 and Tier 10, and you can't even do destroyer things if you want to actually use your planes. And if you want to do destroyer things, you're not good at doing destroyer things because, again, you gave up a turret and a rack of torpedoes. So, yeah, big disappointment. Would highly not recommend the Halford. And for our number 2 slot, it is occupied by the one, the only, the Belfast 43. Yeah, the Belfast 43 is Wargaming's attempt to reintroduce the Belfast in a more balanced state. It's one tier up from the Belfast at Tier 8. And, well, she kind of retains most of what made the Belfast so good, and even has a little bit more, but she pays for it tremendously so when it comes to her reload time. So the whole thing about the Belfast, which is a Tier 7 British light cruiser, it's one of the most busted ships in the game, is that it's got radar, smoke, hydro, a good reload time on its HE spammy guns. It's got HE. It's a British light cruiser that has HE, right? And that ship was released, insanely busted, pulled from the store, and years later we got the Belfast 43. So what do? They up-tiered her to Tier 8. They nerfed the crap out of her guns. You have a 9-second reload time on these guns. And they took away her normal smokescreen and gave her the British short smokescreen. So, unlike the Belfast, where you could smoke up, start farming, radar anything that was around you, have hydro running so you wouldn't eat torpedoes, now with the Belfast 43, you just kind of have a escape smokescreen. Whereas if, you get in a bad situation, you can pop it, break line of sight for a few seconds, and then try to skedaddle away from the situation. And, yeah, it's nowhere near as good as Belfast, right? And it's like, shouldn't it not be as good? Because, it's got the whole try not to be OP thing going on. You do get torpedoes from it, which is great and very useful when you're dealing with ships that are trying to push either your location or your very brief vape cloud that you are hiding in at the moment. So it's pretty good for that, but they really just murdered the guns. And it's got a heavy cruiser reload time on light cruiser guns. But again, you still get the radar and the hydro and such. It's just such a shadow of the Belfast. And they were so scared of not making another Belfast that they went a little bit too far, in my opinion. Just made an absolutely mediocre, if not downright terrible, copy of the Belfast. So needless to say, the ship was, of course, very, very, very hotly anticipated because, you know, we were getting the Belfast back again, but she was released and it's just a not good tier 8 light cruiser. So, yeah. And in our number 1 slot, we have the legendary tier 10 Japanese light cruiser, the Kitakami. Man, the Kitakami, what a saga, what an end to a saga the Kitakami has had. You know, originally released way back when the game launched, an absolute menace to enemy ships and friendly ships alike with its 40-something torpedoes. Yeah, rightfully pulled from the store because, I mean, heck, if I could flood an entire flank with torpedoes and nuke half my team at the same time, I probably would unintentionally if I had a Kitakami back in the day, right? So she was reintroduced, of course, as we all know, with her little event this past holiday season, where you had to give up an absolutely absurd number of resources in order to acquire her. And I did that, and I got her, and man, this ship is not good. It is quite bad. It's good at being a funny, goofy ship. And if this was a coal ship, or just a ship you'd buy in the premium shop, completely understandable. It's fine. It's dumb. There's plenty of dumb, goofy ships in this game that we all know and love and all gladly fork over our resources or cash for, knowing, you know, darn well we're buying some stupid ship. The Kitakami is definitely one of those stupid ships, but it had an insane price tag. Now, I managed to grab it for about $80-ish after I grinded the Snowflake event. By, you know, just playing the ships that I would normally play during that time anyway, and just making sure to you know, play a couple more lines here and there during the holiday season. So, you know, I got a tier 10 ship for $80 after I had to convert the last bit of free XP to Research Bureau points. But this is a ship that if you didn't have any of these resources stacked up and you wanted to get it before the end of the event, the only way to get it was by, well, through paying, was to hopefully have enough free XP and reset a line umpteen dozen times in order to acquire the Kitakami, and you would have had to drop some serious cashola on this thing to get it. And it was and it is absolutely not worth that at all. It's a light cruiser. It's really a destroyer with a citadel at tier 10. Like, most of the ships at tier 10, with the exception of the destroyers and with the exception of some of the light cruisers with some very small guns, can citadel you with their friggin' HE, right? Your citadel's exposed. The CVs can just nuke this thing with their HE bombs because the citadel is literally the middle of the deck, right? So it's such a frail ship if it gets caught. It takes 5 minutes to load up all of its torpedo tubes, and they gave it the Pan-Euro torpedoes for its standard torpedoes, so they're fast, but they do a very small amount of damage. Then you have some deep water torpedoes that, of course, are on the slower side, but do some heavier damage. But it still takes 5 minutes to completely reload the torpedo tubes and do the funny thing, which is launching your 40 torpedoes at the same time. So I've made a whole video talking about how bad this ship is, and yeah, again, if it was a coal ship or a normal premium, sure, fine, whatever. But it's just way too little of a substantial ship for the cost of what Wargaming asked for it. And of course, was a pretty big letdown when it came back because ship's legendary. It's got this insane status as being, you know, a torpedo barge. You can literally deny the enemy a chance to do anything on that flank. But now you get it, and well, it takes 5 minutes to do the funny thing. And most matches, you won't have enough time to reload your torpedo tubes twice with how fast they go nowadays. But anyway, guys, those are my top 5 disappointing premium ships. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comments down below. What would you add to this list? What would you remove from this list? What are your top 5 most disappointing premium ships in this game? Hope you guys have a wonderful Monday and a wonderful rest of your week. Hope to catch you guys in the next one.